Hello YouTube, BlueMatona here, and welcome to this episode of Game Guides where I'm going to be going over the Senate positions in Rome Total War, because these can be a pretty important part of any Roman campaign. They have some good benefits to them, and I'm going to divide this video up into three parts. Part 1 is going to cover how to have your family members elected to a Senate position and how to increase the likelihood of them being elected. Part 2 is going to be the details of each position, and what it entails, etc. And then part 3 is going to be the trait benefits that each position give the family members that hold it. And I think that's personally, I think that's the most important. The traits are really nice, but obviously there are some benefits otherwise. So let's get right into it here with part 1, how to be elected. So really quickly, how the Senate works is each Senate session consists of 8 turns, so 4 years of game time. So every 8 turns you get the little icon on the left side of your screen that says Senate positions assigned, and you want to see your family members in there. The more positions you hold, the better. And family members are only able to hold one position at a time, and they can only hold each position for one Senate session, so for 8 turns. Once they hold a position for 8 turns, they can't hold that position again. And so now how to have your family members, elected to the Senate? Well, completing Senate missions will help. Every Roman campaign starts off with a Senate mission, and you will receive these throughout the course of the campaign, and you'll get a reward. It doesn't tell you what the reward is when you're assigned the mission, but it tells you, obviously what you got after you complete it. And one of these rewards is that your generals will be considered more for Senate positions in the next election cycle. So that's just one way to increase their likelihood. The main way, though, is going to be having the Senate like your faction more. So when you look at the Senate floor screen, you'll see on the left side here, there are 3 columns, one for each Roman faction, and there are 10 icons per column. So you start off the game with a 6 out of 10 in Senate popularity, and then this will go up as you complete Senate missions and do what they say and keep them happy. And it will go down, though, in the long run of the game. And really don't worry about that too much. It's pretty much hard-coded in the game. As you expand more, the Senate begins to fear your power and popularity with the people, and they'll start giving you, impossible Senate missions or mild warnings, just kind of saying, like, stop expanding as much, basically. And eventually, though, they're going to just start raging and tell you to kill your faction leader, forcing you to go full Emperor Palpatine and just take over the Senate yourself by declaring civil war. So that's a topic for another video. That's late game Senate play. But for this one, we're going to keep looking at how to increase your odds of being elected. And next we have one that I'm not 100% sure how accurate it is, but having family members with higher traits. So if you look at family members here, I'm playing as the Scipii, like this guy has 3 influence, so especially the influence trait, I think the more of these that you have, the higher likelihood of that general being elected to the Senate, which just makes sense. More influence, a higher likelihood of being elected to the governing body. So part 2, we're going to look at the Senate positions here. And actually with the Senate, there isn't anything active you need to do as a player when you have a general in one of the Senate positions. But this is that they do have nice benefits, and this is how it starts off every game. The top 5 offices are always going to be occupied by the SPQR at the start of a Roman campaign, and then the 6th, the Quaestor, is going to be occupied by a Roman faction general that's not of your faction. So I've started like 50 games trying to test this, and I've never had the Quaestor start as one of my own generals. It's always as one of the other 2 Roman factions, and that just kind of is how it's set up. It is what it is. So you need to, in 8 turns into the game, try to get yourself elected on to the Senate by the reasons put ahead in part 1. So let's go ahead and look through the different positions. So the lowest position on the Senate is Quaestor, and this is the first position on the Senate. So you cannot have a family member serving as any of the other 5 positions without first serving as Quaestor. So this is the starting place. It's the lowest position on the Senate, but it's where you start. And they're basically in charge of managing the treasury. Really no major benefits to this one. but it's the starting place to get onto the Senate. The next one, the edile, requires that the family member was a quaestor previously, so you can't serve as an edile without having previously served as quaestor. And they're in charge of supervising streets, temples, and the corn supply, so like the food supply, basically. The third one, and this is really the first kind of well-respected position on the Senate, is praetor. And praetor requires that you were an edile, and therefore that you were a quaestor also. So the way you can get into the top 3 positions here is you first have to go quaestor, then edile, then praetor. This is kind of like the standard order of positions that your general will go as you start to climb in the Senate. And this position mostly has to do, it's concerned with justice and law, particularly civil law and laws dealing with foreigners. So again, no active benefits for holding this position, but what it does is open up the next 3 positions. So we're going to look at consul now. Consul requires that you served as a praetor. So again, that the family member served as the bottom 3 positions, and then they can be elected as a consul, but it cannot be consecutively. So you can't just go. You can go quaestor, and then the next election cycle edile, and then praetor, but then you can't go consul in the one after that. So it can't be consecutive. There has to be at least a 1 election cycle gap, so a 1 8-turn gap. And this has authorities over magistrates, the army, and lawmaking, and in many ways is a king in all but name. Next up, we have the censor. To be a censor, it requires that your family member served as consul. And if they conduct the census, and importantly, decide who is Roman or not, and who is a senator or not. And having a family member of your faction as the censor is beneficial because you get the censor immunity effect, which means that the Senate cannot find the faction of the censor guilty of any financial irregularities. So if I'm playing as a Scipii this campaign, if one of my family members, a Scipii family member, is the censor, then I cannot be found guilty of any financial wrongdoing. Finally, we have the highest office, which is the Pontifex Maximus. This actually does not require that you are a censor or consul. For a general or for a family member to be elected as Pontifex Maximus, it only requires that you are praetor, and therefore the 2 ranks below it as well. They're the supreme head of the Roman state, absolute control of doctrine, and are above the jurisdiction of the Senate and the people of Rome. So, one thing I didn't mention, and this applies to both Pontifex Maximus and consul, is that there's an effect of having no censor suicide. So basically, late in the game, the Senate can essentially tell your faction leader to kill themselves, to commit suicide. And if you don't do it, then it starts civil war. And if you have a family member in either the consul or Pontifex Maximus positions, then this event can't happen to you. They cannot tell your faction leader to commit suicide. So that's beneficial. Part 3, we're going to look at the traits. Each position has traits associated with it, and they're very beneficial. I think it's really, really important. And basically how it works is the family member holding that position gets the added traits, and then when they finish the position after 8 years, they retain a trait as well. So let's start with the lowest one, the quaestor. You get office of the quaestor is what the trait is called, and it gives you +1 management. So while your family member is in the position of quaestor, you get +1 management. And then ex-quaestor is the trait when you finish holding that position, and you retain these traits, the ex traits, for the rest of your family member's life. So that family member for ex-quaestor gets +1 influence for the rest of their life in the campaign. The office of the edile gives +1 management and +1 to law, and then the ex-edile position gives +1 to law. The office of the praetor gives +1 management and +2 to law, and then ex-praetor gives +1 to law. The office of the consul gives +2 influence and +2 command, and this is the only office that gives command stars. And then the ex-consul gives +1 commands for the rest of the campaign. The office of the censor gives +3 influence and +2 management, and the ex-censor gives +2 influence, and the office of the Pontifex Maximus gives +5 influence, and the ex-Pontifex Maximus gives +3 influence. So that pretty much covers everything for Senate positions. The traits are really helpful, especially the whatever position traits, because your family member will keep those for the rest of their life in the campaign. So if you have a family member serve as Quaestor, Aedile, Praetor, and then Pontifex Maximus, they'll have +4 influence and +2 to law for the rest of the time in the campaign. So hugely beneficial. I hope you all enjoyed the video and you found it helpful. If you did, please like, favorite, comment, and subscribe. It helps my channel grow. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all next time.